This happened about 3 years ago. I was 29, just out of forestry school, looking for a break from my busy life in the city. I thought a summer job as a fire lookout in a remote national park would do the trick. I was a little nervous. It was my first time being all alone in a place so isolated. I didn't know what I would find out there. Maybe I'd connect with nature again. The lookout tower was small and wooden, perched on a rocky ridge, surrounded by thick pine trees. I could see for miles, but at night, everything felt different. One night, as I settled in, the silence pressed in on me. It was just me, the radio, and a few supplies. Then I heard a soft rustling coming from below. Peeked out, hoping to spot a deer. Instead, I saw a flash of something moving through the trees. I thought it must be my imagination, a trick played by fatigue. But the next few nights, the rustling didn't stop. It grew louder and more persistent. I kept looking out, waiting to see what was causing it. I spotted dark shapes moving just beyond my sight. I told myself it was probably just shadows, maybe even my mind messing with me after too many hours alone. I tried to push the unease away, but it lingered like a cold draft. One particular night, I woke to soft, rhythmic tapping against the side of the tower. My heart raced as I sat up, listening closely. The tapping continued, steady and patient, like something was trying to get my attention. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, shining it into the darkness. There was nothing there, only the still night sky and distant trees swaying gently. I stood there, feeling a chill creep down my spine. I went back inside, convinced I was just imagining things. Days passed, and still the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I could almost hear whispers carried by the wind. I started to doubt my sanity. I reminded myself I was alone, that I had come here for peace. But every creak of the tower felt like something was moving behind me. Each night, sleep slipped away as I lay wide awake, listening for noises that didn't make sense. Then came the moment that changed everything. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling cold and restless. My heart nearly stopped when I noticed a figure standing among the trees, just outside my line of sight. I blinked, nothing, but I could have sworn it was there for just a second. I think I muttered something, like a plea or a question, but there was no response. I shuddered, realizing I was not alone. I turned, feeling the air thicken around me, when I heard the tapping again, louder this time. I didn't know if I wanted to look. Then I heard a voice, soft and barely above a whisper, say, "Why are you here?" My heart raced as I took a deep breath. But when I turned, there was nobody. What was happening? The sun rose the next day, but it brought no comfort. I stumbled into the morning light with shadows still clinging to my thoughts. I decided I needed to distract myself, so I grabbed my binoculars and headed out to scan the horizon. I hoped the fresh air would clear my head. As I focused on the distant peaks, I saw something unusual, a glint of metal among the trees below. Beneath the canopy where I often heard the rustling, something was there. I decided to check it out. The trek down the ridge was steep, but I needed answers. I reached the spot and found a twisted old signpost lying half-buried in the underbrush. The surface was scratched and faded, but I could make out letters. Warning. Restricted area. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I felt drawn to it. There was something eerie about the place. I swept my gaze around, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Nothing moved. The quiet was oppressive. Then I spotted something else, a small, tattered piece of cloth caught on a bush. Cautiously, I walked over and pulled it free. It looked like a fragment of an old ranger uniform. I held it up, examining its worn edges. My mind raced with questions. Who had it belonged to? Why was it here? Suddenly, I recalled the voice from last night. Why are you here? The question echoed in my mind as I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I wanted to deny the anxiety creeping over me, to tell myself all was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed once again. That night, I climbed back to the tower, my heart pounding in rhythm with my footsteps. Everything felt heavier. The familiar rustlings resumed just before dark, but now, I saw shadows more clearly. This time they moved with purpose, darting between the trees. My flashlight swept across the landscape, illuminating nothing. As I settled inside, I grabbed my radio. I needed to connect with someone, anyone, but it crackled back with silence. I thought of the uniform, the sign. Had I stumbled onto something I shouldn't have? A chill swept through the tower as the tapping began again, now accompanied by a low hum. "Help me." The whisper floated through the air, piercing and pleading. I froze, paralyzed by fear. The voice was unmistakable. Felt so close, yet I was alone. I turned toward the door again, the darkness outside pressing against my uncertainty. That S when I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the trees. I squinted, trying to make sense of the silhouette. Something shifted in the shadows, and before I could react, it vanished. Panic surged through me. My heart raced as I backed away from the door, thoughts rushing. Then everything went dark. I woke up sometime later, disoriented. My flashlight had fallen from my hand and lay flickering weakly on the floor. The only thing breaking the suffocating darkness was that flickering light. I fumbled for it, my fingers trembling. The low hum was still there, echoing in my head. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I had to pull myself together. I needed to see if anything had changed outside. I crept to the door, heart racing with each step. I gripped the handle but hesitated. Something didn't feel right. I opened the door just a crack. The cool night air rushed in, immediate and heavy. I shone my flashlight into the woods, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. My instincts screamed at me to close the door and lock it tight, but I couldn't shake the urge to know. I took a small step outside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. Nothing, just the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. But as I turned to close the door, I spotted something at the base of the stairs, more fabric. I knelt down, my heart pounding again. It was another piece of the ranger uniform, but this one was stained and torn. There were more markings, letters barely legible, and they seemed to spell out a name. Stephen. A chill crept up my spine. Who was Stephen? Why had he left this behind? I shoved the fabric into my pocket, feeling a growing sense of dread. I needed to know what happened here, but a part of me wanted to turn tail and run. As I straightened up, something caught my eye in the distance. A flicker of movement, deeper in the woods. I squinted, but it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. I felt the weight of the darkness pressing in, and the tapping resumed from somewhere above me. It started as a gentle rhythm but grew more urgent, like it was demanding attention. I turned to escape back into the tower when a sharp sound pierced the air, breaking my focus. It was a voice, low and distorted, but it pronounced a word clearly: "Run." I stumbled back, tripping over the stairs as I felt another shadow shift just beyond my flashlight's beam. I dashed inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands shook uncontrollably as I leaned against the sturdy frame. The tapping intensified above me. It was as if something was attempting to claw its way down, trying to break through. My heart raced. That S when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the tower. Light footsteps, almost delicate, but their rhythm was relentless. I pressed my back against the door, every muscle tense, listening. I had to confront it. I wasn't going to let whatever this was scare me away. But then, like a clap of thunder, the whisper returned. "Help me, something was wrong." I needed to figure this out, but I couldn't shake the growing dread. Just as I was about to turn around and look for another way out, the footsteps stopped. Everything went silent. The sudden silence hit me like a wave, and I realized there was only one way to find out what was happening. I had to see what was outside, even if it terrified me. I took one last breath, steeling my resolve. Then, the door rattled violently, sending my heart into my throat. The rattling stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. I held my breath, straining to pick up any sound that might indicate what was out there. My hand was slick on the doorknob. Every nerve in my body wanted to bolt for the other end of the room, but I couldn't. Not yet. "Help me," the whisper echoed again, this time clearer, as if it were right outside the door. My mind raced. Who was it? Did someone need assistance? Or was it a trap? I felt drawn to the voice, yet terror held me in place. Suddenly, a thud reverberated against the door. It felt deliberate, heavy. Someone or something was trying to get in. I had to get a peek. I had to know what was out there. With great reluctance, I shifted my hand to the latch and slowly turned it. The moment I pulled the door open a few inches, my heart dropped. Nothing stood there, just darkness. I peered into the void, scanning for movement, but all I saw was the looming trees surrounding the tower, their branches swaying gently as if they were hiding secrets. Then, without warning, I heard it again, the whisper. "Help me." It sounded softer, more defeated. Panic crawled through my veins. I realized I needed to make a decision. Was I going to help whatever that was? Or would I close the door and lock it once more, surrendering to my fear? The doubt gnawed at my insides. I should have kept my distance, but the fabric in my pocket burned against my thigh, a constant reminder of the unknown named Stephen. I took a breath and stepped outside, feeling the cool air wrap around me like an embrace. The tapping above had stopped, but the forest was alive with other sounds, muffled twigs cracking in the distance, a rustle that sent shivers up my spine. I stepped lightly away from the tower, scanning the perimeter. I was aware of how vulnerable I felt in the open, and the urge to rush back inside clawed at me. "Help me." The voice came again, a little louder this time, and I thought I recognized a hint of desperation. Was it someone who needed help? Or was I being lured into a trap? I squinted into the darkness, and that S when I saw it. A figure, pale and gaunt, standing behind a cluster of trees about 20 feet away. It looked like a man, but the way he swayed unnaturally made my pulse quicken. "Help," he croaked, his voice chillingly familiar, sending memories flooding back. The name Stephen danced at the edge of my consciousness. Was it him? Every instinct told me to run, but instead, I took a hesitant step forward, drawn to him against my better judgment. Suddenly, the ground erupted beneath me. The earth cracked, churning with a force I couldn't comprehend. The figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows, leaving nothing behind but a whisper, "Find me before it's too late." I stumbled back, mind racing to process what just happened. What was going on? The tower, my only shelter, felt miles away. I turned and dashed for the stairs. The warmth of the door loomed ahead, but with each step, anxiety surged. What kind of darkness had I just witnessed? My grip tightened around the fabric in my pocket, and as I flung the door open, I was met with the now familiar rattling sound again. This isn't over, I thought, and as I locked the door behind me, I realized I wasn't alone. Someone or something was already inside. I didn't dare turn around. My heart pounded in my chest, and the air felt thick with something I couldn't quite identify. I pressed my back against the door, feeling its solidness beneath my palms. The rattling grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to find its way in. My breath came in short gasps as I scanned the room. In the dim light, I could make out the outlines of my meager possessions: a small cot, a table, and a single flickering lantern. But it was the shadow in the corner that caught my eye. It shifted, just enough for me to notice. My stomach twisted. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaky. Silence fell again, thick and suffocating. My instinct screamed at me to grab the lantern and use it as a weapon, but my feet remained rooted to the floor. I was caught between the unknown and the urge to flee. "Help me." The voice floated back to me from the shadows, now layered with anguish. Was it Stephen? What had happened to him? My head spun as I fought against the urge to open that door again. What if whatever was out there was worse than what was waiting inside? But there was something familiar about that voice. Something that felt urgent, almost like a lifeline. I took a deep breath and, gathering what little courage I had left, inched toward the corner. As I stepped closer, the flickering of the lantern illuminated the space, casting long shadows that twisted like fingers across the walls. I turned my head slowly, peering into the darkness. First, I saw nothing. Then, something glinted, a small shard of glass on the floor, reflecting the light. I crouched down to inspect it. Then, against the stark reality of my surroundings, I saw it. A scrap of worn fabric. A faded patch with a name stitched on it, Stephen. My heart stopped. Was this a part of his clothing? Before I could process this revelation, the rattling escalated again. It felt like thunder, shaking the very foundation of the tower. In a surge of panic, I scrambled back toward the door, but just as my hands found the handle, I felt it a cold breath against the nape of my neck. I whirled around, the lantern swinging with me. The shadows writhed, reforming into the shape of a person. It was impossible. My mind screamed for it not to be true, but there he stood, the very figure from outside, the one who had disappeared moments ago. Yet this time, his skin glistened with a dampness, his features sharp and hollow. "Find me," he rasped, his voice a haunting echo. "Before it's too late." A look of desperation flickered across his face, but it was quickly swallowed by something darker. Then, just as fast as he appeared, he vanished into thin air. The ground shook again, but this time, I realized it wasn't just below me, it was inside. The very walls of the tower groaned, and I stumbled back, adrenaline coursing through me as I looked for an escape. Panic rose. I was not safe here, not anymore. I needed to leave. As I dashed toward the nearest window, I could feel the shadows shifting, closing in on me, whispering, begging me to understand. When I saw it, a piece of the wall crumbled under pressure, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay something gleaming, something that could change everything. My heart raced as I approached the opening, the tension thick in the air. Just as I reached for it, a scream ripped through the silence. It was a sound I couldn't identify. All I knew was that the stakes had just been raised. I fell back, the scream still echoing in my ears. It didn't feel real. It felt like it came from another world, far beyond my own. I hesitated, heart racing, unsure of where it had originated. I could almost feel the walls closing in around me. If I stayed here, whatever had happened to Stephen could happen to me too. With a shaky breath, I turned toward the window again, desperate for air and a view of the darkened world outside. I would have to make a choice: fight or flee. I gripped the lantern tightly, its feeble light fighting against the growing shadows. But just as I reached the window, the lantern flickered violently, plunging me into darkness for a split second. When the light returned, I froze. A figure stood outside the tower, nearly invisible against the night, but I knew it was watching me. Please, it was just a whisper, but I could tell it wasn't coming from the dark shape. The voice was soft and pleading, even more disembodied than before. Was it Stephen calling for me again, or something else? My stomach knotted painfully. I took a step back, feeling the chill seep into my bones. But as I glanced back toward the hidden compartment in the wall, a cold comprehension struck me. That thing, whatever it was, had somehow followed me from the shadows. "Whatever you are, get away from me," I yelled, surprising myself with the force of my words. But the entity didn't retreat. Instead, it drew closer, its features obscured but undeniably sinister. I backed away from the window, reeling from my own fear. In the corner of my eye, the glimmer of glass caught the lantern light again, and I rushed back, abandoning my safety instinct. I needed to know if that scrap of fabric belonged to Stephen, and if it had anything to do with what was unfolding. I fumbled with the opening in the wall, released the debris clinging to it, and reached inside. My fingers brushed against what felt like a small box. I pulled it out, its surface cold and unyielding beneath my hands. The shadows seemed to whirl, watching, waiting, judging. As I opened the box, an overwhelming stench hit me. Inside were photographs, each one depicting a time-lost moment of people I didn't recognize. A woman standing in front of a tall evergreen. A child kneeling by a river. Then I found one that sent icy fingers down my spine, a picture of Stephen, looking eerily content under a tree bathed in sunlight. Moments before I could process the significance, a bone-chilling realization swept over me. I was not the first to stand in this tower, and I was certainly not the last. Footsteps suddenly crashed against the wooden floor above me, heavy and deliberate. The shadows leaped at the sound, ravenous for the light. I squeezed the box against my chest, feeling trapped. I had to run, but where? I was just about to bolt for the door, when I noticed a glimmer on the wall beside me, something metallic. A latch. I held my breath. If I opened the box and the footprint belonged to someone lost, who would I find waiting for me? As the footsteps grew louder, I knew that my time was running out. I made a decision. With nowhere else to go, I moved toward the metallic latch on the wall. My fingers tingled as I touched it, a mix of hope and terror coursing through me. I pulled it down with a jolt, bracing for the unknown. The wall creaked open with a soft groan, revealing a narrow passageway. It was dark and musty, but it felt like my best chance for escape. I didn't think twice about the echoes of footfalls that continued to drum above. I slipped into the passage, closing the wall behind me with a barely audible click. I crouched in the gloom, my heart thumping louder than before. The air smelled damp, and the walls were cold against my skin. I felt along the edges of the space, searching for a light source. My fingers brushed against the rough stone, but I found nothing. I counted my breaths as the footsteps above softened, pulsing with an ominous rhythm. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Are you down there?" It was Stephen's voice, calling for me. Hope surged through me, but I hesitated. Could it be him? Or was it a cruel trick? "Help me," he pleaded, breaking me apart. "Stephen?" I yelled, my voice trembling as I stepped deeper into the passage. "Where are you?" The walls swirled around me. Each step could lead to salvation or doom. The sound of something scraping against wood jolted me from my thoughts. The footsteps above had stopped. I pressed against the wall, straining to listen. The stillness felt heavy, almost alive. My gut twisted as I sensed a presence nearby, something dark lurking just beyond my vision. "Help me!" The voice came again, more desperate this time. The sound seemed to resonate from everywhere, enveloping me. I could feel the tension pulling tighter as I stepped forward, drawn by the familiar resonance. But then, unexpectedly, it morphed into a different tone, a low growl that echoed down the passage behind me. I turned, my heartbeat a frantic drum against my ribs. The shadows appeared thicker, shifting with an intention that squeezed the air from my lungs. I needed to make a choice: push forward toward Stephen's voice or run back to the safety of the hidden wall. I took a hesitant breath and inched forward, driven by instinct. Every inch felt coated in cold dread, but I needed to know the truth. I had to find him, or at least understand this voice that haunted my mind. The passage narrowed as I moved deeper. I could hardly see now, but ahead, a tiny light flickered like a distant star. I rushed toward it, feeling the warmth touch my skin, and thoughts of Stephen melded with the disquiet growing within me. Then, just as I reached the glow, the light died out, plunging me back into darkness. Panic flooded my senses. I stumbled back into the wall, my pulse racing as a growl erupted behind me, deep and primal. That was when everything changed. I felt a cold hand brush against my shoulder, and the world went silent. I spun around, but all I could see was profound blackness. The truth I was searching for began to unravel, and I realized the shadows held more than I had ever expected. I wasn't alone, and whatever was out here didn't plan to let me leave. The moment that hand touched me, I froze. A primal instinct told me to scream, but I held my breath as everything around me shifted. The darkness seemed to thicken, pressing in tighter, as if eager to engulf me entirely. I could feel its weight, heavy against my chest. Without thinking, I turned back toward the passage. Just as I did, the light flickered back on, not bright like before, but enough to cut through the shadows. In that moment, I could see a figure emerging from the darkness. Panic surged again, turning my insides to ice. It was not Stephen. The figure was humanoid but distorted, its features blurred and shifting like smoke. I stumbled back, my feet scrambling to find solid ground, but my senses betrayed me. The growl echoed, low and guttural, creating an unsettling soundtrack that rattled my bones. "Who are you?" I gasped, the words ripping from my throat. I was painfully aware of how weak it sounded, but I couldn't muster more. It didn't respond. Instead, its presence loomed closer, emanating a suffocating darkness that swallowed any remaining light. I fumbled along the walls, seeking anything to ground me, but the passage felt endless. The face came into focus, just for a moment, a twisted imitation of familiarity. I turned again, the light dimming, and I rushed ahead. I needed to reach whatever warmth and safety had pulled me this way. I couldn't forget Stephen, even if this figure had consumed my senses. I pushed forward, ignoring the distance I was losing to whatever that creature was. I dashed past, caught between the desire to escape and the dread itching at my spine. As I pressed on, I began to hear it again, Stephen's voice, echoing down the passage. "This way. I'm here." My heart leaped. It was mingled with something else, something wrong. It was like an invitation wrapped in a warning. I hesitated, half convinced this voice was a trick, while the shadow behind me whispered promises of doom. But I couldn't give up on him. I took a deep breath and followed the voice, retreating from the darkness behind me. Each step felt more like a gamble, each second ratcheting up the tension. I emerged into a wider space, and the last remnants of light blinked before my eyes, revealing an expansive chasm ahead. The light shimmered over rough rocks, creating an eerie scene. I glanced back, and the figure had receded, lurking just at the edge of darkness. Its growl was distant now, but it lingered in my mind like a stain. I could feel it watching me, waiting. "Stephen," I called louder now, my voice echoing across the cavern. I strained my ears for an answer, but this time, silence met my call. The absence of sound made my heart pound harder. And then, in the stillness, something caught my eye, a glimmer near the edge of the chasm. I approached slowly, every nerve alive with fear. I squinted into the shadows, where the glimmer turned into a shape. That's when I saw it, a small object, half buried among the debris. A watch. I froze, recognizing it. It was Stephen's watch. I leaned closer, dread creeping over me. If this was here, where was Stephen? And what had really happened to him? I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. When I heard it again, the growl louder and closer now. My heart sank. Whatever I had found here, I needed to leave. The shadows were moving again, coiling around me with deadly intent. I turned to run, but before I could take a step, something caught my ankle, yanking me back into the abyss. Now I understood. The shadows had a story, one entwined with Stephen's fate, and I was about to become part of it. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my leg as the grip on my ankle tightened. I twisted to see what had caught me, but all I could perceive was darkness, thick and suffocating. Adrenaline surged through me, demanding I fight back against whatever unseen force held me captive. Drawing in breath, I instinctively kicked at the shadows, desperate to break free. To my shock, the grip loosened only slightly, like fingers slipping from their hold. I seized this chance and scrambled forward, dragging my aching body away from the chasm's edge. As I caught my breath, the figure lingered in the distance, waiting, but it didn't advance. I could feel the darkness retreating along with it, pulling away as I dragged myself further. What did it want from me? And this creature, what was it exactly? I didn't have answers, only questions that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I arose slowly, testing my ankle. It throbbed but seemed functional enough. The watch lay abandoned at the chasm's edge now, and I could no longer ignore it. If Stephen had been here, if he had faced whatever that thing was, I needed to know more. The voice that had guided me before was gone, replaced with echoes from the depths that seemed to taunt me. I turned back towards the shadows, mustering courage I wasn't sure I had. The darkness pulsed as I edged closer to the chasm, my heart pounding in sync with the growl. I needed to understand what had happened to Stephen. Focusing on the glint of the watch, I forced myself to reach for it again. But just as my fingers grazed its cool surface, something shifted behind me. An echo of movement. I whirled around, heart racing anew. This time, the air felt different, electric with anticipation. "Get away from me!" I shouted into the void, my voice small against the vastness of the cavern. Silence answered, thick and oppressive. But when I turned back, the shadows had twisted into something more defined, more human. It resembled me, just a shade off, a grotesque distortion creeping closer. "Stephen?" I whispered, horrified. Was this a memory? An apparition? I stepped back, too frightened to confirm. It was wrong in every way. "What do you want?" The figure smiled, but it wasn't kind. It reached out, and with that motion, the shadows surged, coiling around me, a tempest of dark energy. Panic flared. I had to escape, but there was nowhere to run. I dropped the watch and sprinted toward the far wall of the cavern, searching for an exit, hoping for light, anything to break the oppressive gloom. Just as I thought I saw a shimmer of hope in the distance, the shadows spat out a shriek that vibrated through my bones. Cold fingers grazed my arm, pulling me backward into the enveloping dark. "You can't escape." The distorted voice beckoned, echoing Stephen's tone, yet twisted beyond recognition. I stumbled forward, facing the onslaught of the shadows. Fear clutched at my throat as I sprinted toward the far wall, heart racing, desperation fueling my every move. But the deeper I plunged into the cavern, the more the growls transformed into sinister laughter, as if whatever was lurking was toying with my hope. "Stephen, where are you?" I shouted again, but this time, the emptiness felt more profound. I was alone, trapped in a web of darkness, where every flicker of memory brought me closer to my own nightmare. Then came a sudden snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. It sent a rush of cold dread spiraling through me. Something was in the shadows, and it wasn't just an illusion. I stopped, breathless, straining to hear. My body tensed. I was no longer alone, addled by fear, thrust into uncertainty. I could only brace myself for whatever came next. The shadows whispered my name, calling me deeper into the night, where answers awaited, but so did more terror. The shadows roared, swirling around me like a living storm. I pushed against the instinct to scream. Panic surged in my veins as I stumbled deeper into the darkness, feeling its breath on my skin. This was not just a trick of the mind. These shadows were alive, sentient, and darker than I could comprehend. "Stephen?" I called again, my voice lost in the echoing emptiness. My heart thundered as I slipped over the uneven ground. I had no idea if I was moving closer to my destination or deeper into peril. The whispers morphed into a cacophony, each one a plea for help drowning in anguish. It was maddening. Just then, a low growl curled around me, pulling my attention. Was it behind me? To the side? The air shifted as something massive loomed near, and the rhythmic tapping returned, echoing ominously in the void. I turned, instincts kicking in, but saw nothing. My breath came in ragged gasps, every nerve tingling with dread. "Run!" The voice, now clear and urgent, rang out once more. Stephen's voice, twisted though it was. I moved instinctively, legs pumping as I sprinted toward the faint light that flickered in the distance like a lifeline. Shadows recoiled, desperate to grasp me, but somehow, I was able to resist their pull. The ground trembled beneath me as I neared the edge of a cliff, the abyss yawning wide below. My heart raced. Was this the end? The growls intensified, vibrating through the rock and into my bones. Clenching my fists, I looked back, the darkness shifting restlessly. A figure erupted from the shadows, pale and gaunt, just as Stephen had appeared earlier. This time, though, I saw its eyes crackling with something beyond fear. The moment froze as I tried to comprehend if it was him or another manifestation of the darkness manipulating my mind. "Please," it breathed, and the gravity of its plea nearly shattered me. "Stephen," I shouted, my throat raw. "What happened to you?" It drew nearer, the despair etched across its face. "Find me, find the truth." The shadows coiled tighter, strangling the plea in the air. "Where are you?" I shouted desperately, collapsing near the edge of the cliff. The wind whipped my hair into a frenzy, and for a desperate moment, I almost felt free. Then darkness surged forward, coiling around my legs like a serpent. I gasped, my pulse echoing the panic. Adrenaline flooded my system as I gripped the edge and pulled myself back, retreating from the abyss. "Help!" I cried out again, but the shadows roared, drowning my voice in their chorus of despair. They twisted and lunged closer, a wave of darkness threatening to engulf me whole. My breath hitched. I scrambled backward and then, in an instinctive act of defiance, I yanked the piece of fabric from my pocket. "I have this," I cried, waving it as if it bore mystical power. The shadows hesitated, their movements faltering. For an instant, I thought I saw Stephen's form shift closer, reaching through the void. I had stumbled upon something vital. Perhaps there was hope to be found. "Find me," he echoed one last time, and the shadows recoiled, hissing. The look in his eyes pushed me one step further. There were truths deeper than this darkness, truths that needed to be uncovered. Courage ignited within me, responding to the call. I steeled myself as I took a step forward, the darkness swirling at my feet. I felt the fabric in my grasp and thrummed with its energy as I stepped into the tempest. I plunged forward, the shadows writhing around me like a storm. They lashed out, but I pressed on, determination fueling every movement. I wouldn't be lost to them. I would not die here, struggling against an unseen foe. And then, light exploded around me. Clarity washed over the chaos. The moment opened like a fissure, and I stumbled through, plummeting into unknown territory until I landed on soft, damp earth. I lay there for a moment, panting, the chill of dread still coursing through my veins. I could hear whispering now, but it came from beyond the thicket of trees rather than from the shadows. "Help," the voice hovered gently in the air. "Help us." I slowly lifted my head, finding myself in a secluded glade, somehow untouched by the terror I had just escaped. Sunlight filtered through the branches above, casting a warm glow around me. But my heart raced at the thought of what lay beyond the trees. There was no sign of Stephen here. I pushed myself to my feet, scanning the tranquil landscape, and as I turned, glancing back towards the shadowy remnants behind me, I felt the unmistakable weight of eyes on my back. Fear lingered, whispering doubt in my mind. I picked up the pace cautiously, unsure what waited for me beyond the edges of safety. I had escaped the tower, but what of Stephen and those lost to the darkness? The truth still lingered somewhere out there, buried deep within the secrets of the night. I moved forward, resigned to follow the voices that called out, but now mixed with something new hope. The shadows remained a vague promise, an unfinished story echoing behind me. With each step away from the tower, I realized I had not found resolution but merely a path forward, a heavy burden I carried, still unanswered and teetering between the natural and the supernatural. As I stepped into the unknown, I felt the first threads of light surrounding me, a potential for redemption lingering just beyond the treeline. I would carry my memories of Stephen with me, a constant reminder of how thin the veil truly was. I may never know what had transpired in that tower, or if the horrors that lurked were born of darkness or driven by despair, but one truth remained. My journey was far from over.